Hi guys, it's Mrs. Hunt, and today we are going to start factoring. Okay, factoring is like the opposite of what we did in a lot of last unit, which was multiplying. Okay, remember, factors are things that multiply together to give you a value. So today we're going to start out by greatest common factors. Your greatest common factor is the product of the greatest integer, which is your number, and the greatest power of each variable that can divide evenly into each term. So whenever we're finding our greatest common factors, you only want to find numbers that both of them divide evenly into. Okay, so you shouldn't have any decimals whenever you are pulling out your common factors. Okay, so the way that I like to do this is called upside down division. The reason it's called upside down division is that looks like your division bar, but it is upside down. So we are going to look for a number that both 18 and 27 are divisible by. They are not both even, they're not divisible by 2 because 27 is an odd number. Are they both divisible by 3? They are. So I'm going to pull my 3 out to the side. That is one of my common factors. Then we're going to work down. 18 divided by 3 is 6, and 27 divided by 3 is 9. And then do another layer of your upside down division. Okay, so now we're trying to find a common factor of 6 and 9. Again, they're not divisible by 2 because 9's odd and not divisible by 2. They're both divisible by 3 though, so I can take out a common factor of 3. 6 divided by 3 is 2. 9 divided by 3 is 3. Do another layer of your upside down division. And now we're trying to find a common factor of 2 and 3. Well, 2's prime and 3's prime. So there's nothing other than 1 that they're both divisible by. You know you're done doing your upside down division whenever the only common factor is 1. Everything has a factor of 1, so that's why the last row of your upside down division should always be a factor of 1. That's when you know that you are done. So then my GCF, which is our shorthand way of saying greatest common factor, is equal to all of these outside factors that I pulled out. So 3 times 3 times 1. 3 times 3 is 9 times 1 is 9. So my GCF of 18 and 27 is 9. Now kind of a way that you can check this is 9 times 2 is 18. 9 times 3 is 27. Okay. Now some of y'all, whenever we started, you might have been able to look at this and realize, okay, they're both divisible by 9. Is it okay to take a 9 out right away? Yes. We're trying to find the greatest common factor. So you want to try to find the biggest number that both of them are divisible by. Now I was just showing you if you don't find the biggest number right away, you still can take out these small factors, multiply them together to get the greatest common factor. Okay, so I'm going to do another one like that where we take out smaller factors, and then we'll go to where we do take out the largest factor. So again, now we're going to do our upside down division of 24 and 60. They're both even, so they're both divisible by 2. So they have a common factor of 2. 24 divided by 2 is 12. 60 divided by 2 is 30. Do your upside down division again. You keep doing your upside down division until the only common factor left is 1. 12 and 30 are both even, so they're both divisible by 2. 12 divided by 2 is 6. 30 divided by 2 is 15. Do your upside down division again. They're not both even now because 15 is an odd number, so they're not divisible by 2, but they are both divisible by 3. 6 divided by 3 is 2. 15 divided by 3 is 5. 2 and 5 are both prime numbers. They won't necessarily always be prime numbers. It could have been like 2 and 9. 9 wouldn't be prime, but you would only have a common factor left of 1. So my GCF is the product of all of these common factors I took out. So 2 times 2 times 3 times 1. Okay, 2 2 times 2 is 4, times 3 is 12, times 1 is 12. So my GCF is 12. Now again, you can always go back and check yourself. 12 times 2 is in fact 24. 12 times 5 is 60. So we did a good job. So that's how you take out your greatest common factor, if they are just numbers. Now we're going to look at what happens if we have variables. Okay, you can't take out more variables than they all have. Okay, so there's no coefficients here, so we're going to go straight to our variables. You want to look at each of your 3 terms. Is there an x here? Yes, you have 2 of them. Is there an x here? Yes, you have 2 of them. Is there an x here? Yes, but there's only 1. So you can't take out x squared because this last term only has an x. So I'm going to take out an x. I'm going to divide out an x. Notice how we're still using the same upside down division process. So here I had an x squared, but I took 1 out. So now I just have x. I didn't change anything with the y, so I'm just dropping my y down. I had an x squared, which means I had 2 x's, but I took 1 out, so now I just have an x. Again, we didn't do anything with our y's, so drop down your y squared. Here I have an x, but I took the x out, so there's not going to be an x left here, so just y squared. Do your upside down division again. Just like whenever we were doing our greatest common factor with numbers, we are only going to stop and the only common factor left is 1. So here there's an x, here there's an x, here there's no x. So we can't take out another x because it's not in common with all of my terms. Here there's a y, here there's 2 y's, here there's 2 y's. So I can only take out 1 y. Both of these terms have 2 y's, but this one only has 1. So I can only take out 1. Again, we didn't do anything with our x this time, so I'm just going to drop my x down. I had a y, but I took a y out, so there's no y left in that term. Didn't do anything with my x in this step. Here I have 2 y's, but I took a y out, so I'm left with a y. Here I have 2 y's, and I took a y out, so I'm left with just a y. Do your upside down division. This term only has x's, this term has both x and y's, this one only has y's. So there's nothing in common with all 3 of them. Yes, these 2 have an x, yes, these 2 have a y, but when we're taking out our greatest common factor, it has to be in common with all of the terms. So there's nothing left in common, which means I have a common factor left of 1. Because again, everything is divisible by 1. So my GCF is the product of all the common factors I took out. So x times y times 1, which is just xy. Now again, you could check yourself just like we did with our numbers. xy times x. Well, xx gives you your x squared, and there's a y. xy times xy. xx gives you x squared, yy gives you y squared, so that one matches. xy times y, there's only one x, so there's an x. y gives you a y squared, so we are correct. Last one. Now we're going to do one that has numbers, coefficients, and variables. Well, once you get good at these, you're going to kind of start recognizing the greatest common factors, and we don't necessarily have to take out the small numbers one at a time. And plus, we've already done 18 and 27 over here. 18 and 27, the greatest common factor was a 9. Always start out by taking out your coefficient first. So I'm going to take out a 9. 18 divided by 9 is 2, and it has an x. 27 divided by 9 is 3, and that one has an x squared. So whenever you have coefficients and variables, start with your coefficients. Before you go on to the variables, let's see, 2 and 3. Is there anything in common other than 1 with 2 and 3? There isn't, so we're going to move on now to our variables. Here there's an x to the first power, and here there's an x to the second power. So I'm going to take out just an x. I can't take out an x squared because this one doesn't have an x squared. You can't take out more than is in each term. So drop down your coefficient. There's an x, but I took it out, so there's going to be no x there. Drop down your coefficient. Here I have an x to the second power, so there's 2 x's, but I took 1 out, so it's just x. Again, we already said 2 and 3, there's nothing in common other than 1. This term doesn't have an x, this one does have an x, so the only common factor is a 1. So my GCF is the product of all the common factors we took out. So 9 times x times 1, which is 9x. And again, you can go back and check yourself. 9x times 2. 9 times 2 is 18, and there's an x. 9 times 3 is 27. XX gives you your x squared. So the good thing about these is you can check yourself. I always like those types of problems. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing, but we're just going to write our answer different. Okay, so we're still going to do our upside down division, and we're still looking for our greatest common factor. Okay, this one doesn't have a coefficient. This term doesn't have a coefficient, so I can't pull out a coefficient. They both do have an x, so I can take out an x. When I take out my x, I'm left with 2x. You have to be super careful here. X divided by x is 1. Don't make that term disappear. Anything divided by itself is 1. Okay, and it's a minus. Okay, is there anything in common with your 2x and your negative 1? Just a 1. Okay, so the way that we're going to write this, my GCF is x times 1, which is just x. Then times the last row of your upside down division, 2x minus 1. So we kind of did that up at the top, but we just wrote the GCF. But the reason we're writing it times this is when you are factoring, you want to write it as the product of two things that multiply together to give you what you had in your simplified form. These are equivalent to each other, they are just in different forms. This is called simplified form because you don't have any parentheses and you don't have any like terms. This is called factored form because it's written as two things being multiplied together. Okay, now you can check yourself. X times 2x, 2x squared. X times negative 1 is negative x, so I know that we did it correctly. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. Let's do our upside down division, and again, always start with your coefficients first. 3, 12, and 9. They're all divisible by 3. So if I take a 3 out, I have n squared plus 12 divided by 3 is 4n. 9 divided by 3 is 3, so plus 3. So this one doesn't have a coefficient, so I'm done taking out numbers. I'm done taking out coefficients, factoring them out. Now let's see if there's a variable I can factor out. This one has an n squared, this has an n, this doesn't have any n. So I can't take out an n because this last one doesn't have one. So my GCF is 3 times 1, which is just 3, times the last row of your upside down division. And again, you can check yourself. 3 times n squared is 3n squared. 3 times 4n is 12n. 3 times 3 is 9. So we're good. Okay, next one. Do your upside down division. Do your numbers first, your coefficients first. 12 and 3 are both divisible by 3. So when I take out a 3, 12 divided by 3 is 4. You still have your a. Negative 3 divided by 3 is negative 1, which you don't need to write the coefficient of 1 because you do have your a squared. You do have a variable. You're not making that term disappear. Okay, it's not wrong if you do put the 1 in front of your a squared. That's fine as well. Okay, so we're done taking out coefficients because this doesn't have a coefficient. Okay, so now let's move on to our variables. This has an a. This has an a squared, so I can take out an a. They both have at least one a. So drop down your coefficient. I had an a, but I took an a out. Minus, here I have an a squared, but I took one of them out, so I'm only left with an a. And do your upside down division. So this is 4 and a, so you only have a common factor of 1. Okay, so my GCF is 3 times a times 1, which is 3a, times the last row of your upside down division, 4 minus a. So again, always go back and check yourself. 3a times 4 is 12a, 3a times negative a is negative 3a. So we did it right. Okay, move on to the next one. Always look at your coefficients first. 4 and 3. 4 and 3 don't have a common factor other than 1, so let's move on to our variables. X squared and x, they both have an x, so I can take an x out. Drop your coefficient down. If you have an x squared, that means you have 2 of them, but you took 1 out, so now I only have an x. Drop your coefficient down, so minus 3. You have an x, but you took an x out, so there's not going to be an x attached to that 3. You had 1, but you took it out because it was a common factor. Now I have 4x and negative 3. The only common factor is 1. So my GCF is x, because x times 1 is just x. And then 4x minus 3, the last row of your upside down division, and then we're going to check ourselves. Okay, x times 4x is 4x squared. X times negative 3 is negative 3x. So we worked out. We got the right answer. Okay, now sometimes if you're getting good at this and you're feeling confident, is it okay to take out a common factor, the number, and a common variable, all in the same step? If you're able to recognize it, we can kind of combine taking out the coefficient and the variable all in one step. So let's do that for the next 2 problems. So 10, 20, and negative 5 are all divisible by 5. Here there's a y to the third, a y to the second, and a y. So they all have a y. So I can take out a 5y all in one step. Well, 10 divided by 5 is 2. You had 3 y's, but you took 1 out, so now you have a y squared. 20 divided by 5 is 4, and it's a positive, so plus 4. You had 2 y's, you took a y out, so plus 4y. And then negative 5 divided by 5 is negative 1. You had a y, but you took a y out, so it's just a negative 1. Okay, so 2, 4, and 1 don't have a common factor other than 1. They don't all have a y because this last term doesn't have a y. So we're done. Our common factor is only a 1. So my GCF is 5y. And then the last row of my upside down division is 2y squared plus 4y minus 1. Again, go back and check yourself by distributing the GCF that you just took out. 5y times 2y squared. 5 times 2 is 10. Y times y squared is y cubed, 10y cubed. 5y times 4y. 5 times 4 is 20. Y is y squared, plus 20y squared. 5y times negative 1. 5 times negative 1 is negative 5. Y and no y just gives you 1y. So we are correct. Okay, let's do the last one of these. Do your upside down division. Now this one is slightly different. Anytime that first term is negative, you're going to want to factor out a negative. So I'm going to factor out a negative. 8 and 12 are both divisible by 4. And then they both have an x. So you're taking out a negative 4x. Negative 8 divided by negative 4 is 2. X squared divided by x is x. Negative 12 divided by negative 4 is plus 3. You have an x, but you took an x out, so there's no x with that 3. 2x and 3 don't have any like factors other than 1. So my GCF is negative 4x times the last row of the upside down division with it, which is 2x plus 3. Now we're going to check ourselves. Negative 4x times 2x. Negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. X is x squared, so negative 8x squared. Negative 4x times 3. Negative 4 times 3 is negative 12x. No x, so negative 12x. There we go. Okay, so that is factoring by removing the greatest common factor. Now, on the next page, we're doing the same thing. We're using the same exact process, but the problems look really confusing, but I will tell you, these are actually easier, okay? So now it says factor each expression by removing the common binomial factor, okay? So binomial, bi means 2, so a binomial is a polynomial with 2 terms. So like I said, we're doing the same exact process, your upside down division. But now instead of just factoring out one term, our GCF, we're going to factor out a binomial, which is 2 terms. Now, they're going to already be pretty obvious to point out. Here I have an x minus 3 multiplied with that 7, and I have an x minus 3 multiplied with that negative 2x. So that's what's in common. So I'm going to take out my x minus 3. When I take it out, it's gone from here and here. So I'm left with a 7 minus 2x. Now 7 minus 2x only has a common factor of 1. So again, see how we're following the same process we did on the first page. My GCF is x minus 3. Notice how now I'm writing my GCF in parentheses because it's in parentheses, okay? Times the last row of my upside down division. We've always been writing this one in parentheses, so keep it in parentheses. Okay, now you can check yourself. This whole parenthesis is being distributed to the 7, which means you have a 7 times the parentheses, x minus 3. Also, this whole parenthesis is being distributed to the negative 2x times the parentheses. So we are correct. Okay. This next one's a little bit trickier. However, we do see that the parentheses do match. This has a x squared plus 4. Here there's an x squared plus 4. When I factor out my x squared plus 4, it's gone here, gone here. I'm going to drop down my negative x, and I have this plus sign not crossed out, so I have to drop it down. There's no coefficient in front of this parenthesis, which means you haven't understood one coefficient. If you have two terms up here, when you take out the GCF, you still need to have two terms here. Okay, when we're factoring, we're not making terms disappear, we're just making terms look different. Okay, there's no GCF here, so a common factor of 1. So x squared plus 4 times negative x plus 1. And we are done. Okay, let's look at the next one. Again, upside down division. Do my parentheses match? X plus 4, x plus 4. They do, so I'm going to factor out my common parentheses, my common binomial. X plus 4 is gone, x plus 4 is gone. Write out what's left over, so 9x minus 5. Here your common factor is 1. So my GCF is x plus 4 times the last row of my upside down division, which is 9x minus 5. Here we go. And then last but not least of these, let's do our upside down division. Oh no, these two parentheses don't match. Nothing we can do. We're just going to put cannot factor. Now, if we're working on factoring, do you think you're going to get a whole lot of problems that can't be factored? Probably not. But I did want to show you that not everything can be factored. If your binomials, your two-term polynomials in the parentheses don't match, that's not in common, so you can't factor it out. Okay? Now on these last 4 problems, we're going to put together what we did on the first page of the notes and what we just did. Okay, this is called factor by grouping. You're going to use factor by grouping when you have 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. It's somewhat of a long process because we are going to factor the first 2 terms like we did on the first page, factor the second or the last 2 terms like we did on the first page, put it all back together, and then factor it like we did up here. Okay, so it's kind of like 3 problems in one. So we're first going to group our first 2 terms together. We're going to pretend the last 2 don't exist. So we have 12a squared minus 9a. I think that we're doing pretty good, that we're going to be able to take out both our common coefficient factor and our common variable all in one. So 12 and 9 are both divisible by 3. There's an a here and a here, so I can take out an a. 12 divided by 3 is 4. A squared, but we took an a out, means there's still an a. Negative 9 divided by 3 is negative 3. You have an a, but you took an a out, so no a there. So my common factor here is just a 1. So I have 3a as my GCF. and then the last row of my upside down division, 4a minus 3. Now I'm going to pretend this part doesn't exist and just look at the last two terms. So this is a positive 20a minus 15. 20 and negative 15 are both divisible by 5, so I'm going to factor out a 5. 20 divided by 5 is 4a. Negative 15 divided by 5 is negative 3. I couldn't factor out an a because this 15 doesn't have an a. Okay, so there's nothing in common other than 1 with your 4a and your negative 3. So that's a positive 5. So I'm going to put plus 5 times the last row of my upside down division, 4a minus 3. Okay, so do you see how this looked like a problem we did on the front, this looked like a problem we did on the front, and now this looks exactly like the problems we did up top. So let's do our upside down division. Notice my parentheses match. I have a common binomial. Take it out. 4a minus 3, gone, gone, and I'm left with 3a plus 5. There's nothing in common with your 3a plus 5 other than 1. So my GCF is my common binomial factor times the last row of my upside down division. And there we go. Again, this is called factored form because I have one parentheses times another parentheses. Factored form is two things multiplied together, or you can have more than two things. Okay, this is simplified form because you don't have any parentheses. So let's go on to the next one. Again, we use grouping when we have 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. So when we have 4 terms, I'm going to separate and factor each individually. So I'm going to look at my first two terms, 9x squared plus 18x. They're both divisible by 9, and they both have an x. So I'm going to factor out a 9x. So then I get x plus 2. 9 divided by 9 is 1. X squared and x is just x, so you could put a 1x there if you wanted, but you don't need the 1. 18 divided by 9 is 2. You had an x, but you took an x out, so you only have a 2. Your GCF of x plus 2 is just 1. So my GCF is 9x. And then my last row of my upside down division is x plus 2. Factored my first two terms, now let's factor our last two terms, x plus 2. Do your upside down division. Well, there's nothing in common with x plus 2 other than 1, because again, everything is always divisible by 1. So my GCF is 1, and it's a positive, so plus 1, times the last row of my upside down division, which is x plus 2. Do your upside down division of all of it together. Notice your parentheses match, your binomials match. So factor it out. That's your common factor, your common binomial. So I'm left with 9x plus 1. And then there's no like factors other than 1 with 9x plus 1. So I'm going to factor out a 1. So I have x plus 2 times the last row of my upside down division, which is 9x plus 1. So yes, this is a little bit longer of a process, but if you keep your work nice and neat and organized, I think we're going to all do okay. We have 2 more. Y'all are doing a great job. Okay, again, grouping is when you have 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. So group your first 2 terms together. 3x squared minus 15x. 3 and 15 are both divisible by 3. X squared and x, they both have an x. So I'm going to factor out a 3x. 3x squared, but I take the 3 out. I take one of the x's out, so I'm left with just x. Negative 15 divided by 3 is negative 5. You have an x, but you took an x out. The only common factor with x and negative 5 is 1. So you have 3x times the last row of the upside down division. Now, when we group these two terms together, be very careful that 2 has a minus in front of it. So that 2 is a negative. Remember what we said on the front. If that first term is a negative, you're going to factor out a negative. Okay, so I'm going to factor out a negative. 2 and 10 are both divisible by 2. There's an x here, but there's no x here, so we can't factor out an x. So when I factor out my negative 2, I get x. 10 divided by negative 2 is negative 5. Okay, your common factor with x and negative 5 is just a 1. So my GCF is negative 2. The last row of my upside down division is x minus 5. Now we're putting it all back together, and notice our parentheses are matching. So x minus 5, gone, gone, and I'm left with 3x minus 2. There's no common factors other than 1 with 3x minus 2, so I'm just factoring out a common factor of 1. My GCF is x minus 5 times the last row of my upside down division, which is 3x minus 2. And there is my answer. Okay. Last one. 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. Group the first two together, so 15x squared minus 10x. 15 and 10 are both divisible by 5, and they both have an x, so I'm taking out a 5x. 15 divided by 5 is 3. You have 2 x's, but you're taking 1 out, so there's only 1 left. Negative 10 divided by 5 is negative 2. You have an x, but you took an x out. The only common factor with 3x and 3x and negative 2 is 1. So my GCF is 5x. And then the last row of my upside down division is 3x minus 2. Then I'm going to group my last two terms together. Just like the last one, be careful, there's a negative in front of this 6. So negative 6x plus 4. Do your upside down division. Anytime your first term's negative, you're going to factor out a negative. 6 and 4 are both divisible by 2. They don't both have an x. That 4 doesn't have an x, so I can't factor out an x. Negative 6 divided by negative 2 is 3. There's an x. 4 divided by negative 2 is negative 2. Your common factor with 3x and negative 2 is just 1. So negative 2 times 1 is just negative 2. And 3x minus 2. Our parentheses match. So we get to take out our common binomial factor, 3x minus 2, gone, gone, and I'm left with 5x minus 2. My common factor is 1. There's nothing in common with 5x and negative 2 other than 1. So my GCF is 3x minus 2 times 5x minus 2. And we are all done. I hope that y'all enjoyed today. We're going to do lots of days of just factoring, factoring, factoring. So have a great day.